All right, we are live on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. If you're watching today, I just want to thank you for joining us. And before we get started, let me just first introduce myself. I'm Sondra Shannon, CEO of Gatemaster Technology, who is responsible for this programming that is being brought to you today. We've got a very exciting show, something I'm really excited about for a couple of reasons, and you're going to find out here in just a moment. But today's session is bowling and beyond. The social gaming, I'm tongue tied. See what you guys get. You get a dyslexic host here. But bowling and beyond, social gaming's attraction impact. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. And before we get started, I've got the chat open. I can see you guys. Please make a comment for Bart and I. Ooh, I just told you who's coming on the show. Leave a comment for us today and let us know your questions for our guest. But first, let me ask you a question. So let's get you warm up here. Give me a quick show of hands. Who here thinks bowling is more about the game, and who here thinks bowling is more about the social experience? So that's the question for today. If you need something to comment on, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But today's guest is going to be discussing bowling's enduring appeal and explore the core reasons behind bowling's lasting popularity and relevance in modern entertainment venues. We are also going to be talking about social gaming's influence and analyze how social gaming trends are reshaping the guest experience and driving innovation in the attractions industry. We're going to be talking about marketing and training strategies, how you can gain valuable insights into effective marketing techniques and essential training programs for your attraction staff. And last but not least, we're going to try to understand the key trends of shaping the future of at-home entertainment and how businesses can adapt to stay competitive. But first, let me introduce you to today's guest. Bart Burger is the Director of Marketing and Investor Success at QubicaAMF. He has over 40 years of experience in location-based entertainment. He was previously at BPAA, supporting over 3,400 bowling centers with training. Can you guys imagine that? I feel like going to 800 was a lot, but this guy's got me beat. 3,400 bowling centers. And what he says he can't live without is his faith, family, and friends, which is something I also feel that I cannot live without. So without further ado, please help me give a warm welcome to today's guest, Bart Burger. Bart, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ms. Sondra. A pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you for being here. Is there anything that we missed in terms of your bio? Anything you want to add to that?
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction. For a moment, I thought, well, who's on the show today? Did I get on the wrong day? That was very nice. But yeah, I've been very blessed and fortunate to have a long career in a great industry, and I think you captured it very well.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you for being here. And I'm super excited to talk to you today for a couple of reasons. One, I also started in family entertainment centers. Sometimes my guests hear me talk about this, my time at QZAR, and I am a big fan of bowling. And what's interesting about today's topic that I think is kind of fun, I actually had my husband and I are serial entrepreneurs. We're trying to start a TV show right now. I'm trying to buy another business, and then we also run Gatemaster and a number of other things. But I had made a partnership deal probably about 10 years ago with a friend. I'd been working on it for months. And then as soon as we signed the deal, he said, let's go bowling. And what I think is interesting about today's conversation is that's how we decided to celebrate. And so what I'm really excited to hear from you today is how bowling is changing, and if people feel that way, if more and more people feel that way, that it's a celebration as well. So I think we're going to talk a little bit about that today, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It is certainly one part celebration, one part sport, all wrapped up in an incredible activity that, while many of us in America have experienced it, there's a lot of interesting data behind the science on why we enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, and if you're okay, can we jump? I've got some questions and just want to jump into industry trends and kind of the evolution that you're seeing. And
Sure.
you've already highlighted kind of bowling as a significant social activity. What core elements have contributed to its lasting popularity across generations, and how can attractions learn from this?
Yeah, that is a great question. But I think, Sondra, if you don't mind, there's a question before that that's great for us to answer, and that's understanding the societal trends that then kind of lead to the answer to the question
Sure,
about bowling. And that is, if I may just dig into that for a moment.
please.
And in kind of our lifetime, for all of us, you and I and all of us tuning in today, kind of the pandemic is that watershed moment that we kind of base everything on, right? I mean, everything is kind of pre and post pandemic in society now. None of us wish we'd ever lived through it and been a part of it, but it's here and it's kind of what we measure against. So, and our industry is no different. So for me, the pandemic was really an accelerator of some societal trends. For some, they think the pandemic caused things, but I'm a believer that the pandemic was an accelerator of many things that were already in motion for you and I. And many of them were societal trends. Things like, just kind of some simple examples, like food delivery. You think about before the pandemic, what did you and I and others often do in the area of food delivery? It's really limited to pizza and wings. I remember when the big three were experimenting with sandwiches, and could we get sandwiches to people and have them fresh and tasty, and then fast forward to today, what can you get delivered? And the answer is everything, right? I mean, you can get everything delivered. Remote working, telecommuting was a thing many years ago, but the pandemic really accelerated those trends where now you can do really any job virtually from anywhere. And then if you think about things that are relative to the space that we're in, the first that comes to mind for me is online reservations. That absolutely was accelerated and changed. Before the pandemic, as I worked with small business operators, I would encourage them to get in that space of doing online reservations. Now I share with them that they have to be there. It's not an option anymore. They have to use technology and be there. And we've really come to a point where experiences really matter to us more than material purchases. And there's this phenomenon now called IRL, which is in real life social experiences. You and I want to do things in person. Cocooning at home, it was, not happening. We're not going to live in our parents' basement till we're 50 playing video games. We need to be out and be with people. And really, it doesn't matter what your personal beliefs are, how you think we got here, or what you believe might happen to you after we leave here. I think we all can agree that we're not wired to be alone. We're wired to be in community. And that trend has just been elevated and really just reinforced by by the pandemic. Now, all that being said, that really is the lead into the original questions you asked, because I always like to set that up because it answers the question, why bowling? People often say, how can an activity that's been around for literally 4,000 years still be relevant? When many products have a life cycle that they're happy to get a couple of years out of. And the reason for that is, bowling is one of those very, very unique activities that I call it the original social network, right? And what most people don't realize is that bowling is the largest participation sport in America, and that's by a independent third party. The SFIA does a study every year of all the things you and I and people in America participate in, and bowling is number one every year. This year, the study just came out, 50.3 million people bowled in the last 12 months, making it more popular than any other participation sport.
Wow.
Yeah, which is amazing. I mean, certainly sports like football and baseball and others can have larger viewing numbers as it relates to TV and a TV audience. But as far as you and I, and the example you shared with your business partner, as far as the number one activity that people choose in America to do each year, bowling is number one, 50.3 million people. And for me, that just is mind blowing when I got into this business, 40 plus years ago. But I would just share with you that there's a few reasons to that. This activity has no barriers to entry. It goes from 3 to 103. No one sits the bench. It's pretty evenly split, 53% male, 47% female. what I really love about it, that has a special place in my heart is, there's a blind bowling association. So people that, are blind. There's a wheelchair bowling association. It's one of the few activities that 4 or 5 generations can sit around and do in one time. And I love other activities. You mentioned laser tag. Love laser tag. It's a great attraction for many that are in that space. But you're not going to see grandma in 4 generations with laser tag vest on participating in that activity. Doesn't make it a bad activity. Just means it's not quite as inclusive as other activities.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that.
Special Olympics. Track and field, of course, is the #1 activity in Special Olympics, but the second largest request of Special Olympians is to bowl and participate that year. So it just does that. And the last thing I would share on that is this is a unique activity because there's no direct correlation between your skill and ability and the overall social experience. And that may not seem like something important, but it really is because, like I said, I enjoy a lot of activities. I live on a golf course here in North Carolina. I enjoy golf. But if I shank one off into the woods, I'm not high-fiving my buddy. I'm probably using a few words that are inappropriate. But, you and I and the family can be bowling. If we happen to throw one in the gutter, we're high-fiving, smiling, having a great time. So it's just, it's amazing that there's no direct correlation between your skill and ability and that overall social experience. So it just makes it a very inclusive activity that it just lasted the test of time.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And, I actually learned something from you today with regards to that, because I've been working on a project. I had a guest on the show a little while back on, and really trying to understand what types of activities, what types of attractions are the most inclusive. And boy, you got me sold on bowling for sure, because, I never thought about the generational aspect of it, which, so just to give you a little background, I just went to a symposium at Cambridge University on inclusive design. And one of the interesting things that they said in this symposium was that when you think about inclusivity as people, anybody, when you think about what that looks like, you just got to think about your future, where we'll all be, right? Because at some point, mobility is an issue for every human, so long as they have the privilege to live a long life, right? So what's interesting to me is that generational piece that you mentioned with bowling. That's really important. It's really, really important, I think, for community and for family. I mean, just as you said, family, friends, and faith are your things you can't live without. And that definitely shows in what you described right there, that is including everybody in that experience. So thank you for educating me on that, because I knew that bowling was a social game for me, because I'm a gutter. I mean, mine's always I'm always high-fiving because I'm getting my ball in the gutter. But you also mentioned that social gaming's impact on the guest experience. And how do you see this trend evolving? And what are key opportunities that attractions can take to integrate social gaming effectively? Because I think the social aspect of this is so important.
Yeah, that's a great question, Sondra. And I think if you study, and there's some different definitions out there, right? Because we're all trying to understand this and wrap our arms around what it is. But in my opinion, and from some others that I enjoy learning from, there's some things that social gaming, to check the box. Does it have high repeat appeal? Is it a participatory activity? Is it technology enhanced? Technology plays a big part. It can play by small groups of people. We talked about the no experience necessary, but there's a couple of things that from the psychological perspective, it's lighthearted competition that isn't taken very seriously. So that's where you get into this, that, fun and competition are not mutually exclusive. It took me a while to learn that, because I ran businesses that, were sport, and I ran businesses that were fun. So layering them together and understanding that they're not mutually exclusive, they can cohabitate together, and they can be lighthearted competition that still can be fun but not taken seriously was critical for me. And this is what I think is the big change for us today, trend-wise, that it's played simultaneously while enjoying, some higher end F&B. One person participates while the other group members watch, eat, socialize, and drink. And that has really been the biggest change that I've seen from this social gaming. And look, I didn't start out in this business 40 plus years ago to be in the food business, but I'm in the food business. And every one of us, if you're in the out of home entertainment space, you're in the food business, even by default. You can choose to be in it, but not want to be in it, but you're still in it. So I think when you look at all those boxes of what a social gaming is, that food and beverage element is critical. And look, you see some brands out there trying. I mean, Dave and Buster's is doing some testing right now. They're doing social bays. You can get a social bay. They do, with shuffleboard and darts, and they're looking for activities that how do you interact all those things where it's no experience necessary. You can do it as a small group. You can add the food and beverage element, not only from the the social experience, but you talk about the check average or per cap, however you measure that in your space. It just changes the whole dynamic of the experience.
Yeah. No, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I actually had Tim Murphy, the former CEO of Boomers, on the show. And the one thing that he kept saying, because we always ask, what my hope is in having guests on the show is that you're going to connect with this audience and they're going to know how they can be better at what they do and continue to be in this market and serve their guests. And the one thing he said, just like you, is food and beverage is such a huge part of the business that often goes overlooked. I mean, look, we've all been to family entertainment centers with no food or bad food, right? But what I think you're saying right now is like, hey, if you're in this business, you're in the food business because today you have to, because the saying, you break bread with people. It's a social, breaking bread is a social thing with
Yes.
other people, right? So it's so important that we have the ability to do that when we're together in community.
Yeah, we have the biological need to eat several times a day. We don't have the biological, we don't have to bowl or play games and do those things. And when you can marry those two trends together, you're seeing this kind of phenomenon of social gaming that is really, taking shape now, in there. Look, we live in a foodie society. What's the first thing we do when we go to a restaurant? We snap a picture, we post it to our social channel, we tell everybody what they're missing out on, right? And I mean, just how many shows are on TV that revolve around food now? There's a whole network on food. We are a foodie society. So by default, I always say, like, just as it relates to culture, you can design your culture is by design or default. You get to choose, right? You can do your culture by design, or you can let it happen by default. Same as with food. You can be in the food business by default or design, but you're there. And the thing on that, is it. People sometimes think that when I tell folks are in the food business, they think that they have to be in the high-end food business, the fine dining food business. You just have to pick a category and do it well, whether it's quick serve, casual dining, whatever it is. You're in the food business. You don't have to do 5-star food, but what you do has to be 5-star.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because we actually, for Mother's Day, went to Elitch's, which is a local theme park for us here in Denver, and my kids have the 2-meal pass. Everybody's getting ready to, we're getting tired, ready to go home, and they're like, no, we need our second meal. The reason I bring that up is because that extended our time at the park, and even made it so that we had to spend more money, because my husband and I only get 1 meal a day. We bought the 2
Yeah.
meals a day for the kids. But what I think is interesting about what you're saying and how it applies to the business, though, is it's what keeps people there.
Yes.
It had the kids not had that second meal, we would have left and maybe not have spent that extra money, right? So it's a valuable part of the business to call out, for sure. And also, it makes me wonder a little bit about one. You've mentioned that this is a big component in terms of the guest engagement, but when we look at marketing for these types of attractions, you mentioned that Dave and Buster's is trialing some new social bays, and they're always trying new menu items, because whenever I'm in there, I always see something new. if we kind of pivot a little bit to marketing, in your view, what are some of the most effective strategies for attractions to understand that cater to the changing preferences of today's experience driven guests, right? We know
Yeah.
social being one of those, and also having food, but what does that look like?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that for me, I'm a simple guy. I'm from the South. I'm not very smart. What I tell folks in this space that we're in, it's not easy, but it's simple. What we do is not easy, but we're not curing cancer. It is pretty straightforward if we follow the steps. So when it comes to marketing, I do think it's all about the basic blocking and tackling, but with technology. And we can't be afraid of technology and using that to enhance that. I know sometimes small businesses, they just get a little timid when it comes to the technology factor. And there's just, there's so much great technology out there now that they have to use that. But with that, regardless, in any from a marketing perspective, and large organizations as well, this is, data is king. You can't ask a guest to come see you again and build frequency if you can't communicate with them. And you can't communicate with a guest if you don't have their data. So it's just, you boil it down to its simplest point, the data is king. You have to have the data and doing that. And not only small businesses, but I will tell you that, there are some mid to large size brands that, have gotten away from the basic blocking and tackling in building frequency through collecting data and then, utilizing that data and building frequency. They keep waiting for like the second coming, some big revolutionary marketing trend, but it's still basic blocking and tackling. I share with folks on the marketing stage that there's really only three ways to build revenue, no more, no less, no matter how hard you try. And sometimes we overcomplicate business. And in our space, there's only three things we can do. We can get a new guest to come see us. We call that acquisition. We can get an existing guest to come back. We call that building frequency. And within each of those two groups, we can build the check average or the per cap spend. And, we don't have to complicate it more than that in doing that. And then that's back to your point about the food. That's where you can start bundling in, and you see folks like Main Event and Dave and Buster's and different groups that, Top Golf even, that are but doing bundles where they're bundling in the experience of the food and the beverage. Because in the example you gave, for your children when you were at the park there's a high probability, had you not had that extra meal and you would have left, the kids still would have been hungry and you would have went somewhere else. So that share of wallet would have went somewhere else. I mean, there's probably, you either that or you would have had to go home to eat. So you're just going to miss out on that revenue if you're not bundling and thinking about how to package those things together.
Well, and let me tell you, because it was Mother's Day, I did not want to go home and cook.
You were not cooking.
But, I really appreciate what you're saying, because I agree. And I think at the end of the day, when we look at marketing and we've talked a little bit about marketing on this show, but you have some really interesting insights here when we talk about simplifying that, because you have such an extensive marketing background on this. And, what I think is interesting is, you actually said it to me earlier today before we were on the show. You said people buy from people, right? And or brands that they trust. And you can't create that trust with your guest about your experience if you're not telling them what's happening and how to, that's one thing that we at Gatemaster, because we're on the technology side. I mean, you're really speaking a lot to me in terms of, yeah, I totally agree. Data is king. And I also agree that we have to be marketing to our guests in ways that makes them build that trust and that feeling with us and understand what they can expect. And there's so much that we can do to market our attractions to our guests, but you have to have the data to do that. You have to know how to get in touch with them. You have to meet them where they're at. And there's a lot of ways that you can do that, and you don't have to make it complex, like you said. So with your extensive marketing background, what innovative marketing approaches can attractions adopt to stand out in a crowded market and drive those increased visitations? Is there anything you can leave with the audience today as far as that goes?
I think to answer that, I would kind of, and I hate going back to it because we don't want to talk about it, but it is kind of that defining moment in time for us, the pandemic. And you mentioned the data. Coming out of the pandemic, there was, for me, at that time, I was working with 3,400 small businesses around the country, in all the different states with all different regulations, and some more open than others, but just we weren't in any geographic area. We were coast to coast, and what I learned was there was a direct correlation in the recovery of a business and their ability to communicate with the guest during the time that they were dark. A direct correlation, but you had to have the data to do that. So the ones that had, you reap what you sow. So the ones that had the data coming out, they were able to, maintain communication with them and still have that relationship. They had a quicker. Now we all rebounded, right? We've all had a couple of incredible years, in post-pandemic, but there was that first 6, 9, 12 months, depending on where your business was located, that things were a little shaky. And there's a direct correlation for us with the brands that could speak to their guest and have a story and start that relationship, and the ones that excelled in their speed to recovery. So I say all that because I still think that the message is the same. You have to stay in communication with your guest, right? And it's not always about selling. It's about having that, to your point, having that relationship. People do buy from people, and people buy from brands that they know and trust and respect, and share something with them. And so the thing that I do share with folks from a marketing perspective is, if you are going to spend part of your time in that communication loop providing offers, and I think you should, make them compelling offers, right? Don't be cheap. Don't do that. Make it a compelling offer that's exclusive to them, that makes them feel special, that you are discounting that to a fair rate, right? It's just there's nothing worse than a crappy offer from a marketing perspective, and using kind of the shotgun approach there.
Well, I think is interesting about the compelling offer is one of the things that we've seen over the years is that when people are doing, like you mentioned, something special for those people who have engaged with the companies, trusted them with their information. And here's the thing, if somebody gives you their information, and this is because I'm in a very similar place to you. I supported quite a few attractions during the pandemic that were in various states, even various countries, and got to hear a lot about, and what you said really resonates with me. Those that had the ability to connect with their guests had a much easier time. That was totally something that we saw. But also, the ones that made great offers that were not necessarily transactional, because they made a special offer to those that trusted them with their information. But here's the thing that I often have to convince my attractions, primarily the small to mid-size, that are owner operated, is that if they gave you their information, they want to hear from you.
Yes. You're spot on, because I would share with folks what, if I was doing a marketing presentation, the only thing worse than not asking for a guest data is asking for it and then not communicating with them.
Yes.
That's the worst thing. So while I'm excited and I want people to collect data, don't collect it if you're not going to use it.
Yeah, collect it, use it, and then be consistent with it too. My husband coached a business owner, had an amazing business. Unfortunately, didn't make it past the pandemic. But one of the things is, he had thousands of people on his marketing list, and he wouldn't hit the list. Right? That's what my husband called it. He wouldn't hit the list. And then when he finally decided to hit the list, it was very transactional, and we don't want that to be the experience that the parks are having when they market to their guests, because they just hit the list when they needed it. You want to hit it with purpose, right? And communication and getting to know them and building that relationship, but also, like you said, those offers that are meaningful. I think.
I'm a big fan of Donald Miller. I love his work, love his books and Story Brand. And, he teaches that, what problem are you helping the guest solve? What problem are you helping the company solve, right? Everyone has that problem. And so are you helping me? Can I trust you? And can you help me solve my problem? And the problem is not always something bad. The problem can be, I've got the kids this weekend. What are we going to do?
Yes.
Family's in town from out of town. What are we going to do? So we often think of a problem as a negative connotation and things are bad. Everyone that's looking for something from you, you have an opportunity to solve their problem. So what problem are you solving? Can I trust you? And can you solve my problem? And the problem isn't necessarily something wrong. It's an opportunity to help me, do something else, whatever that experience is.
Make memories, be together, get
Absolutely.
multiple generations together. I love that. You guys have me sold on bowling for my next family gathering.
Remember,
Well,
bowling is the original social network. I'm
hey,
passionate about that.
hey, I love it. It's also, it's just incredible. I'm learning a lot from you today. If you don't mind me pivoting a little bit to business and strategy and leadership, because I know you've
Sure.
spent some time supporting all of those businesses, but also training leaders and helping them understand how to best manage their teams. And frankly, I hate saying managing teams, because at the end of the day, nobody wakes up and says and nobody grows up and says I want to be managed someday. So it really
Yeah.
is about being a good leader and serving. And so I know you're passionate about helping businesses, and I'm curious what the most common pitfalls you see in small business operators in the attraction space. What is it that pitfall that you see them in this space make, and what's one piece of advice that you would offer them? Does that
Well,
make sense? I know I'm kind
yeah, that is a loaded question. Probably could do a whole episode on that. But it's a fair question. And it's look, I love the entrepreneur spirit. I love, these are the salt entrepreneurs are salt of the earth folks. They just don't come any better, right? And they risk their own capital. Sometimes they risk their life savings, and they're passionate. And they start with a why, right? They have this why of what they want to do. But as I've had the opportunity to work with many of them, and again, beautiful people, what I find is once they get past that initial why, they spend so much time working in their business, they can't work on their business. And what I remind them is that they started a business, they didn't buy a job. And so many small business operators end up with a job, which is not the same. There's nothing wrong with having a job. I have a job now. But if you're an entrepreneur, you don't want to have a job, you want to have a business. And the only way you can do that is if you're working on the business and not in the business. And so many small business folks, they're just wonderful folks. They get to their wits end, and they forget about the why, and they end up working in the business, and it consumes them, and it turns out to be a job, and it's not what they envisioned when they had a dream, right?
Yes.
So at a high level, what we try to share with folks is how do we help you add some structure. Sometimes, everyone's in a different place. Sometimes that's defining their culture, understanding their mission, vision, and values. Sometimes it's more about execution. But wherever they are and whatever that pain point is that's causing them to work in their business instead of on their business, that's what we have to identify. And that's what we have to kind of help them remove that pain point. Because when you can do that, then they can get back to the joy of, their dream of pursuing their why and bringing that vision to life.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I don't know if you're familiar. So we're a 10X shop here at Gatemaster. I don't know if you're familiar with Grant Cardone. He
I
had
am not.
Yeah, he actually has I think it's Tom Cruise's old assistant as his COO of his company now. And I was listening to her speak one time, and she said, and I think this is really kind of kind of piggybacks on what you're saying. She said, when you want to know what's wrong, what you want to know as an owner, what you should be working on is your business is the thing that's giving you the most trouble. That's where you need to start, just as you're saying. That's the thing that you need to document out. And actually, I don't know if you're familiar with um, Mara from Mumbaro. She was on my show last week, and they
Mhm.
do a lot of they digitize a lot of documentation SOPs for attractions. And what is interesting, she said to me off camera, was that so many of these businesses don't have any of this content.
Correct.
And most of them are the small to mid-sized businesses, because you
Yeah.
don't get to be a Disney without that, right? Because that's one of the things that scales a business, is the ability to be able to train people fast and to make sure that everybody's doing the right job. And having looked at your LinkedIn, I know you have a lot of experience with growth management or scaling, right? What's the biggest challenge for growth management in the attraction industry that you see? And I'm curious if it's similar.
Yeah, I think you mentioned at your previous guest, I call that tribal knowledge, right? If you
Yeah.
sit around, the bar, or have a good bottle of wine or a bourbon with a bunch of successful business operators, there's more tribal knowledge and more knowledge to be gained there than anywhere, and it's an MBA in business right there. But the challenge is it's all tribal knowledge, and it's here and it's not documented. And so, while we don't want to turn small and medium-sized businesses into corporations, because if they wanted that, they just would buy a franchise. And again, nothing wrong with that, but that's not the entrepreneurial spirit, is to buy a franchise. But it's getting them to understand that you've got to take some of that tribal knowledge. It needs to be documented, and so directly to your question, what I see a lot is, especially if you talk a lot about guest experience, it's about service standards, right? If you can't document what good guest service looks like, then you can't give it consistently long term. And you can't expect the frontline people to do that. So the brands that are able to document service standards and execute to that, and there are some small and medium-sized groups that are understanding that now. They're really doing a great job in doing that, but they are kind of I don't want to say early adapters, but they're the outliers, if you will. But that's a challenge, because for mid-sized companies or small companies to be able to teach and explain, guest service without standards, it's hard, right? I mean, and for me, kind of the gold standard that I think kind of fits nice when you're not a Marriott or one of these large companies is someone like Chick-fil-A, right? It's why every time, if you've been to a Chick-fil-A and you tell them thank you, you know exactly what's going to be said back to you.
Yeah.
Every time they're going to say my pleasure, because that's the standard. And so until an organization can document those service standards, it's going to be virtually impossible for them to give that guest experience in a reliable, consistent manner.
Yeah. And look, and I'm talking to the audience right now. I read that it took Chick-fil-A 6 years to roll that out. So when you do these things, you gotta have some grace for yourself and your business, because it's going to take time. Great
Yes.
takes time, and I think a lot of people, including myself. I mean, I mentioned to you, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I mean, and when I first started, I've worked for myself my entire adult life. And when I first started, I remember as a young entrepreneur thinking it was a waste of my time, because I could just be getting stuff done. Now I see it as a way to buy my time back, which is probably the most valuable thing an entrepreneur can have, especially if you're creative and you want to do more and build on what you have. You need that time back, and documentation does that. I was also at a leadership training just about maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they were going over the different various break points of businesses. I mean, they surveyed like thousands and thousands of businesses across America, and the 1 to 3 million mark, which, by the way, anything under 25 million is a small business, right? So that's 99% of what's happening on the planet, or at least in this country, is small business. But one of the break points that they mentioned, the first break point, is process documentation. Like, it's very difficult for businesses to get beyond that 3 million mark if they don't have that done. Does that seem correct to you?
Absolutely. And not only can you not gain control with an existing business, let's say if you want to scale and add a unit. I mean, maybe you want to have 2 units in your
Yeah.
community. Maybe you want to have a couple of entertainment facilities in neighboring communities. We're not talking about being a large chain with 20, 30 units, but sometimes, if you catch that entrepreneurial bug and you get find out how awesome bowling is or other entertainment options are, you might want to replicate that in a couple of markets. It even makes it, you lose that span of control when you have multiple units, and it's impossible. You're spot on. You're 100% spot on. You can't, and the reason is you can be in your own unit, and that's where you get back to working in the business rather than on the business. And you can be there 24/7 and make sure it's done the way you want it done and replicate the way you want it. But if you want your time back and you want to scale, then you have to have some basic, processes in place. Recipes are a big one for food and beverage, right? Again, we may not, I'm not a chef, but without recipes and recipe cards and, standards on the menus, I would never be able to execute anything.
Right. Well, and I learned so much from Mara on this stuff, and mostly around the challenges that businesses have with creating this documentation. But she even mentioned to me they had 2 water parks that were growing to a second, or actually the one had grown multiple times and one that was growing for the first time. The one that grew multiple times, they just plugged in all these processes to the new business and they were off and running. Whereas the other was missing the documentation, and it's been rocky. It's been rough for the team. It's rough on the business. It's just, it's so important. And I just want to reiterate that on the show, because I think what you're sharing is gold for operators.
Yeah, you can change the names to protect the innocent. The outcome is the same in your example. I mean, you really can. You can. It's written over and over and over again. It's spot on.
Yeah. Well, talking about operational excellence, and I know that you've probably seen excellent facilities as well, and you probably understand what both look like, the good and the bad. I'm curious, given your expertise in training and development, what are essential training programs or initiatives that attractions should implement to empower their staff and enhance their overall guest experience?
Well, I think that, again, no matter how small you are, where 2 or more gather, it's critical that you have an onboarding program. And while some people will make it generational, I think it's the right thing to do for everyone, for all generations, but specifically, for, Gen Z and now coming up Gen Alpha, they want to know the why. They want to understand it. So you need to have, it goes back to kind of the documentation, if you will. You need to have a documented, formal, doesn't mean it has to be complex, doesn't mean it has to be overwhelming, but it has to be, if you and I work for the same group, we need to be onboarded in the same manner. And so I think that, how you start is how you finish. So if you start the team off and you have some documented, policies and procedures, not necessarily for HR purposes, but more for execution purposes, and also I think it's, as business operators and owners, we owe that to our team. We owe them an explanation of the why. We owe them what the working environment is and what the expectations are. I think that's a fair exchange of value for what we're going to be paying them. But specifically, having that onboarding program, there's a lot of studies out there about the value of onboarding and how much more successful organizations are that do onboarding. One of the groups that I love in the food space is Texas Roadhouse. And while not perfect, if you study them, they have bucked the trend with a lot of other restaurants in their category. And in fact, they had a lot of pressure put on them because they're a publicly traded company to cut out training programs, save money, short-term things that would, obviously are often done by publicly traded companies to make quarterly numbers. But they held firm on that, and they held firm on their onboarding, their training, and just said, we're drawing that line in the sand. We're not doing that. And if you take a deep dive into their satisfaction of their team members versus other brands in that same space, while not perfect, they far exceed any of them. So I love finding brands in different categories that you can kind of study and find out, what makes them tick. How did they get to where they are? And Texas Roadhouse is one that has consistently beat their peers. And there's a direct correlation in the onboarding, the training, and that they do with their, frontline servers, all the frontline folks that cook, expedite, serve, and do that in that space.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you brought that up. And, with regards to like being able to duplicate that service, and also I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but having gone to Texas Roadhouse a few times, we're kind of carnivores over here, so we eat over there with the kids a lot. But they bring the bread out, right, as part of the experience that you're having there. And I've always wondered, like, that it just always occurred to me that's got to be part of their process, because it's a great check-in point for them with the guests. And it kind of is it's happening every single time you show up. It's not once in a while. I've been to fine dining restaurants where one time I got, and that were owned, smaller, they weren't chains, where one time I would get the bread and the next time I wouldn't get the bread. And that's the difference in training, like you said.
Yeah.
It's not.
Those are the standards. So the
Yeah.
service standard is, if you go to Texas Roadhouse, the server will put down a bev nap, welcome you, bring you the biscuits and the rolls, and then talk about the experience. So it's small things, but that's part of the service standards. That's what they document, and that's the expectation for every server that they're gonna do. Another thing I love about the Texas Roadhouse example, and I don't go there a lot, but it's consistent and I enjoy it. And I'm a carnivore too. My definition of heaven is unlimited red wine and red meat, so I'm looking forward to it. But they will often have two people that will come up, introduce themselves, and they will say, "I'm training. This is Sonia.
Yeah.
She'll be with me to watch over, make sure I'm taking great care of you." Or if I'm observing, Sonia will say, "This is Bart. He's new. He's observing." That you're just not put out there on your own, right? There's a whole cadence to when you are left alone to the guests to serve that table. They do a really nice job in a space that is hard. I mean, it's hard to staff. There's a lot of turnover, and they do a really nice job in that space. I think there's a lot of that we can learn in the out-of-home entertainment space. If brands like Texas Roadhouse and Chick-fil-A can do it, we can too. And they don't always pay the highest wages. The employer of choice in your community, and that's what you want to be as a location-based business. You want to be the employer of choice in the community you serve, and that's not defined by the one that pays the highest wages.
No, it's not. It's what you mentioned: the vision, the mission, the values, all those, the culture that's being created by that business is, I think, what really makes them the employer of choice, is understanding that. Well, I could sit here and listen to you talk all day. I just realized I thought we were going to be talking bowling all day, but then you started talking business, and I'm like, I'm not ready to end the show, but we're getting really close. And I just wanted to make sure that anyone listening to the show today has an opportunity to connect with you. What would be the way, if somebody is either working in a bowling facility or just a family entertainment center? I don't know who all you help, but I know that for sure you can help those listening that are in those bowling facilities or interested in doing one. What's the best way they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. Wonderful conversation. Yeah, we could talk about this stuff. We have to get a good bottle of wine, and we can extend the conversation and talk about some other time, I hope. But absolutely, I'm very blessed and fortunate. I have an incredible job with QubicaAMF here. My role is to help new investors understand their why and help bring the entertainment vision to life. And look, it may or may not include bowling. I'm passionate about bowling. I love bowling. I think it should be part of every out-of-home entertainment center. It may or may not be, but at the end of the day, if somebody wants to talk more about their why or understand their vision, the best way is to connect with me through LinkedIn. I love to connect and understand more about what they're doing and see how we can help. Because at the end of the day, all boats benefit from a rising tide. These societal trends are not going to change, so understanding them and then building your why around that business model is just going to make it wonderful for your community.
Yeah, and what I think is also great is when you have support like you behind these facilities and these investors in these products and businesses. I think we create our economy, right? You have a lot of opportunity to, right now, in my opinion. I know there's a lot of uncertainty. I just was at IAPA, and some of the reports from the members came back with very light years so far. But, I'm of the belief, because as I mentioned, I'm a 10X shop, so I didn't get this from anyone. I got this from Grant, but I'm of the belief that we do create our own economies. And oftentimes it's just who you surround yourself with, understanding the business, understanding what your options are, understanding all of these things that make a business excellent. And so I really appreciate you sharing all of that. I'm definitely going to take you up on wine and some meat. I'm a butcher's daughter, so it would be blasphemous for me not to eat meat at this point. I'd be disowned by my dad. But you know, I think it would be great to continue this conversation, but also, would love to have you back on the show because I can just tell from this conversation that we didn't even scratch the surface of what you can do to help these attractions. And I really want to thank you for helping attractions and for being an advocate for this industry and somebody who's been in this space for as long as you have, because you're doing amazing work. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And folks, don't believe everything you read or hear in the media. It's an incredible time to be in our business. And Sondra, I echo that, we make our own fortune and you can make it a great one.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's an amazing way to end this. Thank you, Bart, for being on the show. I'll see you soon. Well, guys, I don't know about you, but I always love a show that ends up going to amazing places like that. Because if you are listening to this, I do hope that if you're listening to this on replay, I do hope that you'll hashtag replay and leave a comment, like, share, repost this episode, because there's so much gold here for business owners. It's primarily operating business owners, people who are operating attractions. I think no matter what segment of the industry you're in, there's something here and there's something there for you today in this show. So please let us know you were here. Please go and visit Bart. He's on LinkedIn and QubicaAMF. Give them a shout and let them know you were here and that you saw this show. And again, just really want to thank Bart for being here today. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to the team who supports us. It takes a lot of people to put on a show like this. And, we just appreciate your guys' support in listening and the feedback that we get. It's why we keep going. I got a big goal of one show a week. So if you would like to be on the show, or you have got information that you think would help attractions continue with their mission and massively succeed, I would love to talk to you, because not only are we sharing this incredible information, I think that we have to share with the world so that we can continue to keep this industry thriving, but also selfishly, I get to learn from people like Bart. So I'm just thrilled today with the conversation that we had, and I hope that you'll come back for next time. I'll see you guys on the other side, the next Live with Sondra show. Take care and be great.